just have my sticky notes with my passwords right here. You can't see them, but they're there.
I mean, now technically that does limit the scope of who can get at your
Yeah, it's
accounts to
secure. Nobody's
people that
coming in here.
have physical access to your environment, right? Like we could talk about the
My cat.
yeah,
Thank you so much for tuning into Blue Square Security. As you could hear from that little outtake, we had a really good time talking with Dave Anderson this month in October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Dave is from Helient, and today's conversation was around endpoint security, AVD, and really more around the user experience. So we touch on endpoint security, but we get into Intune and conditional access, user adoption, MFA, some of the challenges that come with MFA, user expectations, risk-based policies, some of the hybrid work and conditional access scenarios. So I hope you enjoy this month's episode with Dave from Helient. Thanks so much. Enjoy. All right. Welcome to the first FY25 episode of Blue Square Security. We are in October, which happens to be Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And we are joined today by Dave Anderson, who is from a partner by the name of Helient. And Dave, if you would just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, your IT history, your security history, and then kind of fill the gaps in as far as who Helient is and what type of customers you serve.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. My name is Dave Anderson. I am an Azure architect working here at Helient. I spent the last few years in the Azure space, doing different deployments of different sizes, enterprise, small business, things like that, with a focus around Azure Virtual Desktop, leveraging Nerdio with that as well, just to make sure that the overall experience is as great as it can be for not only the users that are consuming those desktops, but also for the administrative teams that have to manage and set those things up and make sure that they're secured. Prior to spending the last few years in the Azure space, I worked as a Windows systems administrator for a health system here in mid-Michigan where I live. And before that, spent about a decade working at a law firm as well. So worked in the legal field, which is where my current employer has that specialty and that focus. Most of the work that we do here at Helient centers around law firms of different sizes around the country, but a lot of AM 100, 200 law firms on the East Coast. And they're really just about making sure that we're maximizing the user experience, making sure that once everything's deployed and secured and set up, that the users have everything they need for that white glove approach on that legal desktop with its 100, 150 applications that are being deployed to those users.
Perfect. And maybe for those that don't know, dive a little bit deeper into the world of Helient as a partner. I mean, do you guys stay away from certain size customers? You mentioned the legal component and the customers that you serve, but is there a customer that you don't go after, or a customer that you don't serve?
Because of Helient's background in the legal space, that tends to be where most of the work comes, just from word of mouth. Once one law firm hears that one of their competitors is doing something in the space, they'll often seek out similar work in that same area, just to make sure that they're as secure and as modern as those other firms that they're working with or against defending. But what Helient really excels in historically is the mid-market space. So we might be as small as 100 user deployment up to 1,000 users, couple thousand users, somewhere in that space. Before I came to Helient, I was with a partner that focused a lot on the enterprise space. So we would have large medical device companies that we would do infrastructure as code overhauls for, make sure that their platform was deployed in a secure, predictable pattern with approval gates and everything like that, using Azure DevOps and Terraform usually as infrastructure as code, so that they could manage that application state and that environment state. But it's Helient's been great as far as the focus on the desktop experience, because a lot of times what you'll see in the space at certain places is a focus on, okay, here's your desktop good luck with the image and application management and everything like that. So really making sure that it doesn't, the ball doesn't get dropped at that point is kind of the focus of a lot of the project work that we're into, and we have some great teams here that are very experienced and very good at managing that type of thing. So
Cool. So when I hear law firms or I hear legal vertical, the first thing that pops into my head, and this is, just three of us here talking, but the first thing I think about is kind of retention. Legal firms have a tendency to gather lots of data, case notes and litigation notes, and maybe even recordings for depositions and things like that. What is the kind of hand holding that Helient brings to the table when you're talking to CISOs or IT directors or CIOs when we start getting into the world of compliance and starting getting into the world of retention policies and data labeling and things like that? Is that a conversation you guys live and breathe in? Is that a one-off? What does that situation look like?
yeah, definitely. Because it's going to depend, first of all, by state. There are different requirements per state. So if we're working with the client in one state versus another, making sure that that we have all of the legal compliance set up for the defined period of years that records need to be kept and things like that, making sure that we're helping them be compliant with that. But a lot of what it comes down to, if I'm thinking about the end user experience, once we set up all those guidelines and say, okay, what are your requirements, let's help you meet those, is that law firms like to keep just about everything that they can. They don't like to delete stuff. They don't like to, because what if they need it, right? So that can lead to conversations around, okay, here's what you need for your email environment. We'll have attorneys with mailbox sizes of 100+ gigabytes, and they want to be able to just have it all where they can search it and get it on demand, and it's challenging to really think about that in terms of, well, if I'm thinking about an optimized desktop environment in an AVD space, I'm thinking, hey, maybe we can just keep the last 3 months of that, really readily accessible, and then kind of have the rest in an archive, so that it's snappy, so that we're not having to parse through a multi-hundred gig PST for them, right? But
It's a
um,
lot.
it's a ton of data, and it can be challenging on the FS Logics profile side to make sure that that is performant and functioning, so that their user profile data that follows them around as they're going to different session hosts in that environment, so that their experience is the same no matter what they're connecting to, that's all there and performing in a way that they need. So that's really one of the challenges that we have a lot of conversations in the discovery session of any project, where we're trying to help them think through what data do you have, and how much of that do you need to be accessible really quickly, versus what could we maybe move off to, if we're thinking about file shares or other things that need to be stored from depositions or recordings, or even just general file share document stuff. What makes sense from a cost perspective? What makes sense from a speed perspective? How do we help you balance that across all the data that you have, because they have so much data in that space? So that's really where a lot of those initial conversations focus, to make sure that we've got the right scope kind of thought of and thought through for those users in that data.
Yeah. I'm in Atlanta, so like you said, it varies from state to state, and even I assume even in the legal field, maybe even by county in some instances. Um, but I know here in the Atlanta area, and I hate to even bring this up, but like COVID pushed a lot of court dates out, and I've got a neighbor that has an open case that dates back pre-COVID, but because of COVID, court dates got pushed back, and he's still on the docket, I guess is the right term to use for this calendar year. But I think his initial case was probably 2018 or 2017. So pre-COVID,
Wow.
you put COVID in there. Now they're putting him on the calendar, hopefully by the end of 2024. But I equate that back to, that's data from 2017, 2018 timeframe that resides somewhere, wherever they store it, wherever they store it, whether it's a file share, like you said, a PST. Are you seeing trends of that retention policy getting bigger because of COVID or because of just instances? It doesn't have to be the pandemic, but other things.
Absolutely. I think the pandemic really accelerated a lot of the certain trends and maybe pushed some things back, like you're mentioning, where instead of being something that maybe all the court dates were happening in a timely manner, and you really were focused on data from the past couple of years, maybe for court stuff. Now it's extending farther and farther out, and that's a lot of data that individual counties and law offices have to think about for cases where before it might have been, oh, a couple years we do this case and we're done. Obviously, some longer legal proceedings definitely exist and take place in that space, but once we get to it's been 6+ years since maybe that court date was originally set. What are we looking at in that space in terms of those files and how long they need to be managed? And it's really extending the tail on that, how long back we need to look for data, and extending the amount of data, because they're even when there's no court activity, there's still procedural things that keep the case alive, different things that the court will require as far as, okay, hey, we're still having this court date, this is still being set here, different things that the law firms will have set up as far as just monthly billings, where, hey, we're keeping this file, we're in communication with the court, we're trying to move it up, we can't get it any faster than what we're currently doing. But yeah, the pandemic definitely extended and delayed a lot of these things that are coming there, while still also maybe pushing a lot more firms and different legal offices and courts into looking at how long are we going to need to hold on to this data for the average case, like not even like anything really that was planned to be that long, right? So
I think the
yeah,
averages got skewed now. I mean, it used to be
definitely.
like you mentioned, maybe looking back 3 to 4 months just to keep the traffic down to a dull roar. But now that the averages have changed, that 3 months, maybe 3 years. I mean, I don't live and breathe in the world of legal, but
Sure.
just hearing my buddy's case and the time for that, it just kind of blew my mind that it got pushed back that far. But I digress. Um, Moving a little bit back to the end user experience, we're talking about desktops, but I think the one thing in cybersecurity that gets overlooked more often than not is the word endpoint. The word endpoint can mean so many different things to so many different people. But I saw a stat the other day that kind of, made my hair stand up, and it was there are more activated cell phone plans on active status than there are human beings on the planet.
Wow.
Which means, some of us carry 2 or 3 phones for work or whatever the case may be. But the end user is not just sitting down at a desktop, or they're not just bringing their laptop. They're accessing the web from either, a tablet of some sort or their phone. Is that an area that you help end users with, as far as locking down access and making sure that the correct tunnels are in place and the correct applications have security baked around them? Is that something that you guys assist with, or see a lot of requests coming in?
Absolutely. So when we're thinking about endpoint security in the virtual desktop space, we're thinking about a few things, right? Kind of all combined together. So we're thinking about, first of all, what's the device that the user is using physically, that they're physically touching, connecting, and logging into, and then using to connect to maybe a virtual desktop space, or maybe connecting to a resource on Azure or something like that. So what we try and do for, as far as general recommendations around those types of things, if we're connecting to, let's just say for this case, I'm connecting to an Azure virtual desktop here in East US, in that region. So my endpoint, my laptop that I have, this physical device that's on the desk in front of me, has to adhere to a certain standard, and we use some Intune for provisioning this stuff and making sure that the compliance there is tied in with the conditional access policies. We have set up an intra ID so that we can make sure that this device is not compromised to the best of our detection knowledge and ability. So if that device is reporting, okay, the user logged in normally, the user logged in from the same IP that they have been logging in. There's nothing different about where they're originating from. None of the signals that are being reported to Enter ID are suspicious or different or malicious. What's going to happen most of the time in that case is when I go to log into to Azure Virtual Desktop, I'm going to get a prompt for Duo MFA. In our case, we have it backended with Azure Authenticator, but for this here we'll say Duo, and that 2FA pops up. I have to enter the code. We're doing the more secure way instead of just approving a prompt, so that it's harder to accidentally approve a request that maybe doesn't come in officially. And then that session gets authenticated all the way through, so that I can then get the desktop that has the applications that I need to do whatever work it is that I'm going to be doing inside that provisioned Azure Virtual Desktop environment. So it's basically, it's not the traditional way of I don't have to connect to a VPN necessarily to get into that environment, because we're basically leveraging these signals that Enter ID is providing, along with those conditional access policies, to say this device looks good. There's nothing unusual about the login. So all the signals that the Enter ID lets us leverage for a business that's we're maybe 80 people here at Helient, small business, but we get to leverage the global network of signals that Enter ID has access to through Microsoft security infrastructure, to say, is there anything weird about this? Is this network seeing anything strange that we need to, hey, maybe we enforce MFA every time, but if we were doing risk-based MFA policies, maybe it throws up another prompt. Maybe I also get my Microsoft Authenticator prompt to say, hey, is this really you logging into this thing? And securing it from that initial sort of endpoint access point. So before I even get to that session host and get access to my applications that maybe have a lot of customer data, I'm being sort of audited and authenticated and secured, so that that's happening from my internet here in my home office.
So, and you bring up a couple things here. One is the MFA component always makes me think end user experience, right? And I don't know a whole lot of attorneys, but I do know that the ones that I work with, I don't know if demand is the right word, but insist that end user experience, especially when we're talking about Intune, Entra, MFA, typing in the code versus just the prompts. How is that conversation handled? Because attorneys, when they need something, it's typically timely, right? So it's not only do I need the right path to my data, but I need it yesterday. And in fact, I was just on a customer call yesterday with somebody in the legal field, and this was the topic of discussion. It was, we want to roll this out. We want to enforce MFA. But from the top down, they have said end user experience cannot be disrupted. And that sounds great. And hopefully we can get to a spot where it's completely rolled out and end user experience is pleasant. But their concern was that if there was too many speed bumps along the way, adoption falls off and eventually people find workarounds. And that's obviously a huge security risk. So do you guys hear that same talk track? And if so, how do you address that with still keeping security top of mind?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to setting what the norm is, and then having the users adjust to that. Because if it's a different experience than what they're used to, if suddenly somebody comes in and says, well, hey, your MFA, you're now going to get prompted for MFA, every time you log in. If they're logging at the beginning of the day, and it's persisting that for the 10 hours that they're working that day, the 8 hours they're working that day, maybe that's a good balance. Maybe it's, unless anything changes, if you have E5 licensing, you can use that risk-based policy analysis on conditional access to say, hey, if anything weird about this changes or looks different or needs to be prompted again, let's have that prompt come up. But otherwise,
When you say weird, you mean different location, different
Different
device.
location, different, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So anything that's different from the normal usage pattern. So if I'm maybe accessing it from my home internet and I have a consistent IP or semi-consistent IP depending on the residential internet that you have, maybe that's all totally fine. Maybe there's an office internet. Maybe some folks are still hybrid, some folks are still full-time in office. If they're connecting from office internet, well then sometimes the conversation says, well, hey, if they're connecting from our office internet and one of these public IPs that we have, why would they? Let's just not prompt for MFA, and that's kind of the conversation that's a little difficult to have because we want to stop treating the network as a security boundary. We don't want to say, hey, just because you're connecting from this IP, or it looks like you're connecting from this IP, let's skip one of our security steps because we do still see there's the possibility to IP spoof if you have a threat actor that knows enough about where you're connecting from. So those are not necessarily what you want to rely on for that individual user security. We want to think about securing the identity and leveraging those conditional access policies and those signals that we're seeing to say, hey, this user looks like they're logging in from their environment. Let's normalize that. Start of the day, you're going to get an MFA prompt, make sure it's you, and then let you into the environment to do your work for that day. And you probably won't get prompted unless something changes with the way that you're connecting to that environment. But it's challenging because attorneys want to be able to get to the stuff that they're working on very quickly. And so a lot of it's fine tuning these and having lots of conversations about, okay, we made this policy so that they're getting prompted for MFA every time they log in. Is that working for them? If you normalize it like some firms have, it's just part of the day. You do that whenever you're logging into any application, and it's totally fine. But it's about setting the expectations on the user side, not just with the C-level staff that we're having the initial conversation with to say, listen, here's where we see pushback from the user side, and we don't want them to think about how do I get around this if we can make the experience reasonable while still making it secure.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the size of the firms that you're working with, and these are not mom and pop shops. These are larger legal entities that have multiple people, multiple departments. And I would assume that when you get into a setting like that, you've got people, like you said, working remotely, or maybe they've got offices scattered across the US or across the globe. How do you go about setting the boundaries on the conditional access when you've got such a wide variety of possibilities? I mean, you can have people that are working from a Starbucks or working from their home, or maybe they go home during their lunch break. Like, there's so many different types of scenarios in 2024 that are valid. I mean, there's times where I go to the office in downtown Atlanta, and to make sure I miss traffic, I leave at a decent time and then come back and set up from my house. So that, from my ID standpoint, it's going to hit two different networks within a couple of hours. It's not uncommon I don't hit public Wi-Fi, but there's different places that I can go that have, a hybrid workforce environment where I can access other, printers and things like that. And I think that's a common thing now, office sharing, things like that. What is the process that you guys go through to not just understand how many of those scenarios there are, but to get to that hand-holding process of saying, we're not going to remove layers of security because this might be difficult. There's some legwork that needs to be done, but we need to understand what your workforce looks like. Do you guys have a process that helps you understand that?
Yeah, a lot of this comes down to having these conversations and making sure that when we are implementing, for example, a new security measure like that MFA process that you get access to with E3 or E5 licensing. We just get more controls with the E5 licensing. But even if we're just having those conversations around, okay, what are your users actually doing when they go to connect? Are they jumping around from location to location. Maybe if it's not the impossible travel where if they're suddenly connecting from Atlanta, but then they're connecting from Japan,
Right.
maybe it won't trip any alarms or alerts or anything like that. But normally, if we're thinking about, hey, if you change networks that you're logging into in this environment, expect that there's going to be an MFA prompt, because we want to make sure that somebody didn't hijack your laptop, take it to the next Wi-Fi point in the next little strip mall here, and just see whatever they could get access to on your device, in case something weird happened in terms of somebody and you're connecting in a coffee shop, somebody grabs your laptop, runs to the next Wi-Fi point. I'm just making stuff up at this point, but stranger things have happened, right? So
Or leave it
uh,
in a cab, or you left it on the
leave it in a
plane,
cab.
or somebody
Is it
grabs the wrong bag and package. I mean, there's a thousand
exactly.
scenarios.
So when that device is used from a new location, really you should want it to throw up, hey, let's make sure that this person logging in or trying to access something, that this is still them, right? Like making sure that the identity is secure with the policies and processes around that. But if we think about um, maybe something, if you're thinking about a typical time that people log in, well, if you're in the United States, maybe there's a window where that's typically acceptable. But a lot of the firms we really work with have offices over in London or Dubai or anywhere else across the planet. So what does it look like for them when we're structuring different what's expected policies, that type of thing? So a lot of the times, again, and this can be more conditional, but if we're able to normalize, hey, MFA is the way that we secure this, and make sure it's really you, and it's really hard to get around MFA. So 99 point, whatever 9% of the time, if you pass an MFA check with a device that's going to, either prompt you for an approval or a code, we're pretty confident that's going to actually be you, versus it's a threat actor or somebody who nicked your laptop from the coffee shop or the airport, or is just leaning over your shoulder. And then we usually have conversations in there around, hey, how quickly do your machines lock when they're unattended? How quickly do your virtual desktop sessions lock when somebody hasn't put any keyboard or mouse input in the last few minutes? Because even if we're not thinking about a coffee shop, we're thinking about working out of maybe a shared work environment or a home work environment. Um, and there are other people in those environments. So what kind of process do you want to have around those devices that have access to all this sensitive company data? How quickly do you want to lock those down if maybe somebody stepped away and forgot to lock their computer, that type of thing? So a lot of this ties in with what that user experience is like, and how quickly they can, kind of get back into working when it is them, when they have just stepped away for a minute. My computer locked. Okay, let me punch in my password. Let me, MFA back in if that's how strict you have it. But really, we're kind of doing the medicine before the actual thing that it cures, which is how costly is a breach for a company. If you want to think about sure, it's maybe it's annoying to have to punch in a code off of MFA, but is it more annoying than having to remediate a breach? I don't think so. I think
Or
that
making headlines in the news.
making headlines, having if you're a company that has a reputation and that goes in the news, like what does that cost you? What are people going to want to continue to do business with you if it looks like your security posture is lacking? No, you want to make sure that you seem like you have everything in order and that your policies are strong to enforce a secure modern work environment. That's really kind of the conversations that we have, and it can be challenging for certain firms because they'll have done something a certain way for a very long time, and change is hard. And so a lot of those conversations are just around, here's what this is going to be like. Here's the common pain points, and here's what it looks like to get past them. And here's what we can do for your users to make sure that we have this dialed in so that it is secure, but not annoying. And it's working with them and talking with them and getting that user experience dialed in that kind of helps guide those conversations.
And I mean, the whole end user thing is paramount with any organization, not just the legal vertical. I mean, the end user experience is good for culture, it's good for productivity, it's good for morale. I mean, when technology doesn't work, I think annoyance is an understatement. I mean, technology is great when it works, and security is probably that times tenfold, right? Like security is needed, but you can get into situations where if you've got gaps or your posture is not as strong as it could be, then there's a probability of you making headlines, and there's probabilities of data breaches, and everything that comes along with that is measurable on multiple avenues. But I think what this all boils down to is something we haven't discussed yet is what are you guys either doing, proposing, or do you partner with somebody to help with this? How do you go about getting the communication down to the end users, right? I'm assuming when we talk about where Helium's strong point is, you're probably talking to director of technology and CIOs and CISOs, and those plans and those practices are being pushed to the end user based on business requirements and the compliance components that certainly play a factor into different locations. But all of those decisions are typically made at a manager or director or a C-level type of person. But when it gets down to user adoption and end user communication, how do you go about either advising getting that set of instructions or the user adoption metrics, if there is such a thing in your world? Like, how does that get measured? How do you push that communication to ensure that the end user experience is still good, but yet the business requirements are still being either met or exceeded?
Right. So usually what happens between the managerial level and the decision making and the users, there is a dedicated core of IT staff that know what the user experience is like historically, what the users will tolerate and expect, because they're often also the ones that are troubleshooting the environment when something happens and it goes down or needs to be updated, patched. New applications need to be deployed, applications need to be updated, that type of thing. So a lot of our process involves working very closely with those people that have their hands on the technology, know what the users expect, know when something's working, know when something's not, and working with them to figure out what are your users going to tolerate and what are they going to expect, and what can we push as far as the security envelope, because we've got this mandate from on high. We need to enable MFA or this additional process for getting into the session host, or maybe even if they're coming from the Citrix side, and they're saying, well, now I have to get into this Azure Virtual Desktop, and any change for a user who's just looking to get into the machine and do their work can be challenging. So what we do is really kind of work with the folks that know what the users have historically experienced, and what they're kind of used to, and then say, okay, here's what the experience looks like. Let's walk through it together. Make sure that you understand, all the pieces and parts of what the users are going to see, how we're going to, get that application that's going to connect them on there, whether it's the new Windows app that just went GA that can connect to AVD, Windows 365, DevBox, any of those things in there. Using that app, what does that app look like? What does that process look like? What are some of the errors that might pop up if somebody clicks the wrong button? And having usually putting together a set of custom documentation for that client that says, okay, these users are going to need to provide their email address. It'll pop up what they have access to after they enter their password and their MFA. And here's what that connection process looks like. Here's how you configure it. So maybe the user has two monitors at home. Here's the guidance we provide to say, here's how to make it show up just on your one monitor, so you can have, maybe your email just kind of up on your other monitor, but your productivity applications are living in this virtual desktop space that shows up exclusively on that second monitor. Just kind of thinking through, hey, what things did I, maybe as somebody who lives and breathes in the space, kind of take for granted as far as that initial setup and that user experience, and how can I make that easier for the user who's just trying to get to their applications and do their work, but now something's changed on the technology side, and we have to help them think through that and get to what they're going to get to without too much fuss and hassle, right?
Yeah, no, all phenomenal points. Natalia, it looks like you were coming off mute to chime in, so I'm going to put myself on mute and let you ask
No,
some
you're good.
questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit to something that I feel like if me and Greg don't ask about, we might be coming to you asking for a job at Helient. So, um, so, so it's co-pilot, right? And law firms are a little different, right? I've got a couple of them in, this year, and they're probably a little slower. But what has been kind of Helient's guidance on the adoption of co-pilot? If you're going to adopt it, hey, here's kind of things you need to do. Greg talked a little bit about retention. That's obviously part of it. Then there's the data security part of I don't want people accessing, especially in a law firm, certain files and using them. But I think Copilot can probably help. There's a lot of things you need to do when you're in the law space. Not that I'm an expert, but so kind of what's Helient's guidance been around that?
Sure. Yeah. So actually, we're extensively testing it ourselves to find out the best way to put that in front of law offices and make sure that the offerings there are relevant and that they perform well for different use cases that law firms are going to have for that type of data, while of course having the very first thing that we talk about in that conversation is here's what you can put into this, here's what you should put into this, and here's what you don't want to put into this, and making sure that the guardrails around that information are there, so that in case somebody accidentally puts something in there, that it's not the end of the world, that it doesn't go out anywhere, that it doesn't get subsumed into the system and show up on somebody else's machine, that type of thing. But at this point, what we're trying to do is put together really just a different set of experiences around that for law firms specifically to think through it. On my end, myself, the most common thing I use Copilot for is when I'm writing some PowerShell scripts or different code things, and saying, hey, what's a more efficient way to write this thing, and maybe get a snippet of information that way. But really on our side, for Copilot, we're trying to make sure that the things that we're putting in front of firms are really productive and really relevant to the work that they're doing, without stepping into that space of, oops, we dumped an entire case file into here, and now it's just out to the rest of just helping them understand what the implications of using a tool like that are, and making sure that anything they put in there stays within their environment and doesn't go out to the broader public, right? So
Gotcha.
Are these conversations that are being well received as far as the AI component within the legal space? Is this something that they see value in? Is it something that they're scared of, something they're excited about, or do you have a gauge for that?
It depends. It depends entirely on the audience, because I feel like everybody in the space has had a different experience with sort of the what we call the AI model. Whether you've been experimenting with Copilot or any of the other AI options that are out there. So it's kind of, is it going to help me do my job more efficiently, more predictably, and faster? And what does that look like? Is it helping me write legal briefs? Is that something that it can do? Is there a solution around that? Is there a way that we can integrate this into our workflow? Because again, whether it's users or attorneys specifically within there, it's then something that has to be integrated into their workflow. And whether they are, some attorneys like to dictate to an audio recorder and have that transcription written up for initial drafts of things in their environments. Other attorneys have different processes, and they might be more receptive to, oh, okay, if I know that I need to integrate a Copilot solution into my workflow, because it's going to give me this as the output and this value. What we're trying to do is help them connect the dots on the value based on their use cases, and each firm's a little different, even as much as they're all similar in a lot of ways. But we're really just trying to have those offerings kind of comprehensively put out and thought about on the user side of things, because we could sell them a whole project around Copilot, but once it gets down to the user, you've got to make sure that they can use it, right? Like have that user experience be paramount to improve that adoption of whatever it is, whether it's a brand new virtual desktop environment or a Copilot solution that we've designed to help them streamline their legal offerings. Really, it's got to be something that's usable, that works well, that's reliable, that they're going to be able to count on. And once you provide a good experience for the customer from that aspect, then they're just going to keep coming back to you, because they're going to realize, oh, you've provided us something that really improved our day-to-day, our workflow, our security, our business operations. You kept our name out of the papers, that type of thing. And then they're going to come back for more of that. So really, when whatever we're offering that we're preparing or thinking about, we're just trying to make sure that it's something that has a high value for the customer, so that they come back to us and treat us as the trusted experts that we are.
That's awesome. And I guess the next logical step here is, we're talking a little bit about MFA, we've talked a little bit about AI, but this all, from a 50,000 foot view, is really a zero trust conversation. Are these conversations that are front and center for law firms? I mean, zero trust has a framework that's built around it, and there are implications to end user experience when you start putting in frameworks. And if you assume breach, which is, certainly our suggestion, that's going to affect the end user, because there's so many roadblocks isn't the right word, but there's so many,
Speed bumps.
speed bumps that could happen or do happen. But it's just, they're safeguards. And, if you assume breach, there's going to be some extra steps. So is the zero trust conversation something that you're seeing in the world of legal? And if so, is that one that's received well?
We make it front and center when we're talking about Azure architecture, Azure foundations, Azure landing zones, all the things in that environment. But even going back to what we were talking about, assume breach, that tenet of the zero trust principles. That's kind of what we're doing with some of the stricter MFA policies that we recommend, just to say, hey, at any point, somebody could have their laptop grabbed and it's not them using the thing anymore. What if we are just prompting for MFA more frequently or consistently, or if anything has changed, that type of thing, right? Kind of going along with that, we have these conversations because these are the conversations that law firms expect us to have, and that all of our clients kind of want us to make sure that we're thinking about this stuff when we're building their environments, because we have to. Because if it's the first real Azure project with any infrastructure that a client is coming to with us for. If we're thinking about a brand new Azure Virtual Desktop deployment and thinking about moving off of something like Citrix, maybe, or anything like that, they don't necessarily have any infrastructure experience inside of Azure. They might know how their on-prem networks work. Azure's a little different in the networking space. We're basically trying to help them connect the dots on how it works, so that we can help them secure it. If I'm thinking about additional things that again, this is the E3 E5 licensing split, which is where a lot of our customers are. But if we have access to E5 licenses, we can enable one of the other tenets of zero trust, which is use least privileged access, right? So we can say, okay, if anybody's going to do anything, especially with a highly privileged role like global administrator inside your Azure environment, make them authenticate with Azure PIM, that privileged identity management, to really make sure that the person that's accessing that stuff in their environment is leveraging that. So that's for me one of the key selling points of the difference between the E3 and E5 licenses, because my assumption when I go into a new environment, I'm given access to that, and say, okay, you're going to be giving me a very high level of access into your environment, and I've had that for dozens and dozens of client environments over the years, so I know how to handle that. But like, wouldn't you like to make sure that the bar for anybody that's accessing a role like that in your environment is high, is going to be approval gated, or maybe even needs that second approver. If a contractor is accessing a highly privileged role in your environment, do you maybe want to have somebody else approve that before they actually get that high level of that? And that's the the Azure P2 licensing that you get with that E5, and that's going to be just a better version of your environment's access all along. And I love getting to do that. I actually ask hey, are we going to provision my access to your environment with PIM? And they say, oh, we got E3, that's okay, because then that leads into that conversation about what are the actual benefits of E5. And I love getting to talk about that part of it, in addition to everything else there. But I mean, we could talk about any other part of the zero trust verification process, that breach assumption, and any of that. But yeah, no, we bring that zero trust conversation front and center, especially when we're talking about the networking pieces that are at play there as well.
Yeah, we may have to do just another conversation just around P2 and around PIM, because that seems to be one of the conversations that I'm having more and more frequently with a wide variety of customers and a wide variety of different verticals, because it doesn't discriminate as far as what type of business you have, and it is truly security front and center, and it's end user focused. And at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. I mean, we're all organizations with a lot of variety of different users, and threat actors are resilient and nonstop.
Yeah, and then with that licensing too, we get to talk about access reviews and say, hey, do the roles that you assigned to somebody maybe 6 months ago, do those still apply? Let's have a regular cadence where we talk about making sure that the roles that you assigned 6 months ago are still valid and in use today, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Patel, I know you've had a question teed up, so we're gonna end with a question that is one that we typically ask the same question at the end of each episode, and there's no right or wrong answer, but I'll let Patel take it over.
There's no right answer. So no, if you had, we've changed this a couple times. If you had the power to enforce one cybersecurity rule globally, what would it be, and how would you ensure everybody follows it? 30 seconds. No, I'm just kidding.
MFA. If I'm thinking about what I do for my own accounts, I use a password database. I use 1Password at work and at home. So in addition to having unique passwords generated for every service that I use, I also make sure that I have MFA enabled on every account that supports it. And I'd say the majority of accounts, especially for anything that matters these days, are going to have multiple options for MFA. I love the passkey authentication. I think it's just a much better way of replacing the traditional username and password model, just because of the way that that's structured on the back end. It's fantastic. But really, if I could, because I feel like most people on the planet have a phone that's or three. Like I have three on my desk right now, for for different things. You mentioned there's more phone plans than there are people on the planet, right?
You're our stat right there. There you go.
I'm skewing the average for you up, but
above average.
Yeah. So I love that, and 1Password has a sort of an easy 2FA integration, and for especially for people that maybe are just trying to find, hey, how do I use this at home? I get a lot of people that say, oh, you're a computer, you work in IT. I'm having this problem with my Hotmail account, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Well, let's get back to the basics here. Let's make sure you're using secure, unique passwords. Let's make sure you're using MFA, and all that. But that would be what I would love to see, because I think that would cut down on a lot of things for a lot of people.
I just have my sticky notes with my passwords right here. You can't see them, but they're there.
I mean, now technically that does limit the scope of who can get at your accounts.
It's secure.
To people that have physical access to your environment, right? Like we could talk about
my cat.
The security for a physical environment, which is also important. But yeah, no, I love to talk about this stuff. I when I was working for the health system here in Michigan, one of the things that I work with the IT security department to oversee and administer the at the time it's Trellix now, but it was the McAfee e-policy orchestrator system, and so I learned a lot about the way that the IT security department thinks about securing those devices and things back then, and that was kind of also the other part of the equation for making sure that you have something that's going to alert and protect your endpoint, right? And so we're having a lot of conversations about what E5 offers for that with Defender Plan 2 across our client environments who are maybe looking to cost-wise consolidate and also operationally consolidate their endpoint security. So
No, I think that.
Go
Oh, go
ahead,
ahead.
Tom.
Very good. Good.
I think and this gets into a whole another topic, but I think in the world of security, I think we've done a good job of moving from a best of breed approach to a best of platform approach. And that consolidation play is certainly a big part of it. But the metrics out there from third party providers like Gartner and and the like, they're all suggesting a best of platform. And really the meat on the bone when that conversation comes up is it's the signals that you get, and it's getting these technologies to talk to one another. And that's where I just feel Microsoft is so far ahead of the disparate offerings that are out there. And there are tons of really good point products that are out there. I'm not bashing any point products, but when you start pulling all of these point products together, and companies are growing, they're acquiring other businesses, and that brings its own challenges. But really where I feel like we shine is getting all of these signals to talk to one another, whether that's your SIM talking to a wide variety of different, log collectors, or if it's your endpoint talking to your MDM, or whatever the case may be. The platform that 365 brings to the table is looking at trillions of signals, and it's getting a wide variety of different components of your network seamlessly talking to one another. And I don't think we do a good enough job telling that story, because I've been inside some networks where they've got just a ton of technology. And when it comes to reporting and getting actionable data out of these tools, a headache is probably an understatement. It's almost an act of Congress to get that done.
yeah,
And I'm a sales guy, so of course they're gonna hear me saying, well, you should just consolidate. But the reality is it's to their benefit, and I don't know if that comes across from a sales guy as well as it should.
yeah. Where else is a law firm of a small size going to get that level of threat intelligence? You could in theory you could spend a lot of time and money building something that emulates what Microsoft has done with the platform that you have today, with all the devices reporting all the threat information across the planet. But for the cost of an E3, E5 license, why not just tap into that leverage Defender and be covered?
Yeah, I mean, and the one part of that story too, which I find fascinating, is I don't think people understand when we say the amount of signals we have. I mean,
So many.
Vitaly, what is the number? I think it's
So it changes all the time. I thought it's like 78 trillion, but
yeah. I mean,
uh,
it's almost 80 trillion, but that includes all the big logos like Windows and 365 and Windows Update. Like there's a bunch of big logos that go into that trillion number. But the logos that it also includes is things like LinkedIn and Xbox, which from a security perspective, it
It's
also
huge.
helps combat against that social engineering component, which doesn't really get talked about all that much. But getting data from like the Xbox world and the LinkedIn world, this kind of the social component of it, there is a huge security benefit to that. And I don't really hear that talked about a lot internally, but it's certainly a part of what we do. But here we are coming up on time, and I did want to just make one final comment here. Is I just think it's hysterical that I've been in IT now for almost 20 years, and to hear somebody else say, you know, if they hear that Dave works in IT, they ask about, well, I got this problem with my Gmail, or I've got this problem with my Hotmail. It's so comical because I just was at a function last night and ran into a buddy of mine, and what are you doing these days? You're doing cybersecurity. Oh, that's good because I really got this issue with my laptop.
Sounds like my parents.
Yeah. Guy that installed
Do I need
our
a password
generator.
manager? Okay,
Yeah. A guy
Oh,
that
no.
installed our generator said, "Hey, you, what do you do?" I'm an Azure cloud architect. He's like, "Oh, I'm having this problem with my website," and it's like, okay, all right, well, Squarespace, go for it, have fun. He's like, "Oh, I'm already on that." I was like, "Okay, well then talk to their support; they can help you."
Well, it's just funny though because like you hear IT and people just think everything to do with computer. If it plugs into the wall, you can fix it. It's like
Yes.
I know nothing about websites. I know
Oh,
nothing about laptops.
no, it's all different. It's such a big space that even within Azure, there's so many different areas of experience, and so we'll come across something and it's like I haven't happened to touch that particular area of Azure, but I'd love to learn about it. So it's just a
Right.
matter of where's your specialty, where's your expertise, and helping people make sense of the widely complicated technology stuff that we interact with on a daily basis.
Well, Dave, this has been an enjoyable conversation.
This has been great.
Yeah.
Been awesome.
If people are listening and want to learn more about Helient, is it the website? Is it a phone number? What's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, Helient.com. We'll get you right to our website. We redesigned it. It looks pretty great at this time.
And you're
of
in
year.
IT, you probably built it, right?
And we have an excellent sales and marketing staff that's collaborated on that, made sure it's looked really good. And Helient.com will get you to our offerings, put you in touch with us, and I'd love to even just help you think about what the environment could look like that you have today, and think about securing that with zero trust architecture. So maybe we'll speak again in the future on a product call or client call or something like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being so gracious with your time today. We truly
thanks.
appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
both.
much.
It's been great.